The Literature Review by Lauren F. Wollman. Excerpted and adapted from material by Jeff Knopf. A literature review is a study that assesses the state of knowledge about a certain problem, subject, or field. It is not simply a summary of what we know about the problem, subject, or field, but rather a critical evaluation of research that has already been done and an analysis of what gaps remain to be explored or resolved. A lit review is conducted to ascertain what we think we know about something, and thus is sometimes conducted as an end unto itself. More commonly, it's an important early stage in a larger research project. In this latter case, a lit review serves three purposes. It familiarizes you with the field or problem to the extent that you're now in a position to contribute to the literature with your own research. It allows you, in other words, to develop a necessary level of expertise through mastery of the literature. It tells you what has already been accomplished or explored, and with what methods and sources, so you can determine that your own research question is both feasible and desirable. In other words, has not already been answered. It allows you to identify what your contribution is and exactly how it fits into the existing literature and discourse. It can provide a source of inspiration. As you engage the literature on your topic, you'll find yourself agreeing and disagreeing with it and deriving some really good ideas, questions, or hypotheses from others' work. The goal of a lit review is to evaluate relevant aspects of the state of knowledge or practice on a particular subject area. Thus, the first task is to determine what things people have tried to examine or to do. The next step is to determine what people think they have learned from these efforts. After this, you can sort the results into three categories: things the existing studies and reports have in common, things they disagree about, and things they overlook or ignore. It's a good idea to come to some judgment about the quality of the literature overall. How much have we learned so far? How good is the understanding conveyed in the literature? Is the research making progress, or has it stalled out? The third task, summarizing the research results in terms of three categories, can be especially valuable in the lit review section of a thesis proposal. In short, any literature can be usefully and easily categorized or grouped into several piles. 1. Areas of consensus or near consensus. Among things people have studied or tried to implement, there may be areas where nearly all the relevant experts agree on what is the correct knowledge. Such conclusions can be either positive or negative. In other words, they can involve beliefs about what is true or what works, or they can involve beliefs about what is false or does not work. Areas of consensus represent the conventional wisdom about a subject. 2. Areas of disagreement or debate. In many cases, we'll have some knowledge about a subject because people have studied it, but there will not be consensus about what is correct. These areas of debate will usually give rise to the alternative camps or schools of thought. 3. Gaps. While people may have studied or debated some aspects of a topic, there may be other things that no one has examined yet. These remain gaps in knowledge. Such gaps might involve questions that no one has tried to answer, nor even thought to ask, or data sets that no one has yet tapped into. In determining the areas of consensus, areas of debate, and gaps in knowledge, try to identify both the questions researchers have asked and the answers they've given. Knowledge might be incomplete because there are important questions no one has yet asked. It might also be incomplete because there are alternate answers no one has yet considered. In reviewing the answers that have been given, both those where there is a conventional wisdom and those where there is disagreement, look at how the answers have been produced. In examining how people have reached their conclusions, consider evaluating the following: their assumptions. If there are disagreements, can they be traced to different assumptions made by the conflicting studies? Are the key assumptions made by the most important studies a plausible basis for research, or are they so problematic as to call into question the rest of the analysis? Their logic. If there are areas of divergence, can they be traced to different theoretical perspectives? Do the studies explain the reasoning that supports their key conclusions, or are important arguments made purely by assertion? Is the reasoning provided logically persuasive, or does it contain internal contradictions, or make a giant leap at a key point in the analysis? Their evidence. If there are disagreements, can they be traced to the use of different bodies of evidence or to disagreements about the facts? Do the studies provide evidence to back up their main claims, or are important claims made purely by assertion? Is the evidence valid? In other words, is it factually accurate, internally consistent, and on point? Has all the relevant evidence been considered, or have some obviously relevant cases or bodies of data been overlooked? Their methodology. If there are disagreements, can they be traced to the use of different methodologies? Do the studies make clear the methodology by which they've reached their conclusions? Or are key claims made purely by assertion? Was the methodology used an appropriate choice for the question being researched? Was it applied correctly? For each document you read, be sure you can succinctly summarize the study's main claim. You should be able to describe in a sentence or two the central argument of each source. It will not always be necessary to include this information, but having an awareness of each study's overarching thesis will help you as you write a lit review. Make sure to keep copious notes of your sources. If a particular thought, idea, argument, or fact draws your attention in a given source, be sure to document the full citation so you won't have to dig for it later. The earlier you develop solid citation and documentation habits, the better your life will be. When you write up the lit review, it's not usually necessary to discuss every source you read to acquire your initial understanding of a field of research. The written review should instead be selective. It should discuss only the studies or documents that have a direct bearing on your proposed research, and, rather than summarizing these studies or documents in their entirety, should focus only on the aspects that are relevant for your purposes. For example, if you're going to test somebody else's hypothesis in your thesis, you should note the original source of that hypothesis. There's no need to report all your false leads and dead ends. They exist in every research process, but should be edited out of the written product. When you write up a lit review, do not simply summarize item by item each publication you've read. A lit review should not read, Paragraph 1 notes that Book A says X. Paragraph 2 notes that Article B says Y. Paragraph 3 notes that Book C says Z, etc. The point of a lit review is to synthesize the cumulative results of prior research and to impose some intellectual order on the material that shows how it relates to your own research question. Assessing the literature in a given field usually requires identifying certain themes in the research and describing how they've developed. It's often helpful, therefore, to think about grouping individual documents into larger camps or schools of thought. One can do this in terms of different theories they propose and defend, in terms of different methodological approaches they take, or in terms of different policy orientations they favor. Often these differences reflect differences in the disciplines or backgrounds of the authors. Academics versus government officials, psychologists versus economists, think tanks, etc. This can be another basis for categorizing piles of information. For any subject where there's already a substantial body of research, chances are that somebody has already sought to classify the research into contrasting schools of thought. In such cases, it's a good idea to start by familiarizing yourself with existing summaries of the research. In many fields, or subfields, there are encyclopedias or other reference works that contain short introductory essays on the research on particular topics. In writing up a lit review, however, it's essential not to rely on other people's summaries of the research. Review articles in specialized encyclopedias or academic journals are a good place to get started, but they cannot substitute for your own reading. You should read for yourself the sources that are most critical for your own research project. You can use encyclopedia articles, review essays, and prior theses to generate an initial bibliography for this purpose. Scan the items listed in their footnotes or references, and look for any items whose titles sound relevant to your own area of interest. Students doing research in a new discipline like Homeland Security often have the expectation that there will not be any literature relevant to the question they want to research. It does not pay to be too skeptical on this score. You might be surprised at what you find once you start to search for resources. Even if you come up empty, however, this is not a wasted effort. If you can report that a serious inquiry uncovered no examples of studies that examined your question, then you've largely demonstrated that your research will fulfill the contribution to knowledge criterion for evaluating research proposals, largely because you still have to show that answering the research question would be worthwhile. To be a contribution, the knowledge should have some value to some audience and not be pointless. This still leaves the question of what to discuss in a lit review. The problem of too few sources can usually be solved by thinking in terms of two tiers or circles of literature. In the first tier, or inner circle, you're concerned with documents that directly address your own proposed research question. In the second tier, or outer circle, you broaden your review to consider publications that are relevant to or overlap some part of your own question, even though they don't directly address the same point. If there's a reasonable body of work in the first tier, in many cases this will be all you discuss in the lit review. Your goal will be to evaluate the cumulative results of this body of research, or to situate your own research proposal in relation to this existing literature. You would only go outside this inner circle if there was some specific other document that proposed a theory, policy proposal, or method that you want to apply in your own project. If there is nothing, or very little, directly related to your topic or problem, then your lit review will need to consider some items in the second tier. You might consider sources with a theoretical perspective you want to explore in your research. Even if no one has applied the theory to your specific question, it's still appropriate to discuss key works that have developed the theory so you can explain why it might provide a good perspective for analyzing your topic. For example, a student exploring the hypothesis that organizational cultures might inhibit interagency collaboration among emergency responders might find it useful to review some of the research on organizational culture, even if it relates largely to corporations or non-governmental organizations. It can also be very helpful to think in terms of analogies. In particular, are there situations or problems that are very similar to the one you want to study, so that research on those other problems might contain relevant ideas? For example, if you're interested in how the police might play a role in preventing and deterring terrorism, and you discover no one has researched this specific question, you could look for research on how the police act to prevent and deter drug trafficking or gang activity. These problems are similar enough that it might be possible to adapt some of the policies and procedures from anti-narcotics or anti-gang activities to use in counterterrorism. Likewise, if you're interested in protecting crops from agroterrorism, and you find no good studies on this topic, you could consider looking for research on efforts to protect crops against natural disease outbreaks. Once you begin to consider literature in this second tier or outer circle, you will likely encounter the problem of too many sources. The number of potentially relevant documents, especially once you begin considering well-developed areas of theory, could be vast. So you need a way to restrict your focus. Consider using these rules of thumb. 1. Focus on the leading authorities. You may discover that certain authors or studies are cited frequently in the literature. These are probably considered key works, so it's a good idea to respond to what they have to say, even if you have to ignore some less influential documents. 2. Focus on recent documents from high prestige or high visibility sources. You generally want to emphasize the most recent research in the field you're reviewing. Among recent documents, look especially for those that have been published in a high prestige outlet. Books from the university press of a highly ranked university, or articles in the leading journal in the field in question. Sources that are getting lots of attention are also important. An example would be a book on the bestseller list. 3. Focus on the documents that are most relevant and helpful for your research agenda. The more directly on point a study is for your research, or the more you're relying on a document for inspiration about how to approach your own research, the greater the role it should play in your lit review. Again, when there is a lot of literature, it's not necessary for a review to be comprehensive. Try to identify and discuss the items that are most relevant and helpful for your particular concerns. A lit review should concisely synthesize and summarize, from a set of relevant sources, the collective conclusions most pertinent to your own research. It should evaluate the state of knowledge in terms of what's right, what's wrong, and what's missing, because no one has yet considered it carefully. To create such a review of existing knowledge, it helps to ask and answer the following questions. What questions have the existing publications and documents addressed? What things are they trying to find out about, and what things have they neglected? What are the main points of convergence in the literature, and what are the main disagreements? Where disagreements exist, what are the bases of the disagreement? For the theory-oriented, what theoretical frameworks have they considered, and what potentially relevant theories have they failed to examine? For the policy-oriented, what policies have they proposed or tried out, with what metrics, and what potentially relevant policies have not been considered yet? What evidence has the literature looked at? What potentially relevant bodies of evidence, such as cases or other sources of data or information, have not been examined? How solid are the conclusions that have been reached? Are they based on sound reasoning, careful assessment of the evidence, and a well-executed methodology? Or are there good reasons to doubt some of the existing conclusions? What's the overall quality of the literature? What have we learned to date? What are the most important problems and gaps that require additional research to address them? A lit review is not the same as a book report, in which you would summarize and sometimes evaluate a work, nor is it the same as a book review, in which a book report is conducted for a collection of works, all in the same essay. A lit review is an analytical macro view of the topic, as it has been investigated inside or among disciplines and fields to which it is relevant. Think of this as a football game. Your thesis is your contribution to the game, your special skill or unique move. In order for that skill or move to be recognized and appreciated, it must be looked at in context. Before you get out onto the field, you must fill the spectator in on what's been going on so far in the game, who's playing what positions, what the score is, and so forth. Similarly, before your reader can assess your contribution to the literature, he or she must have a sense of what else has been done, what the prevailing arguments or ideas are, and how your work fits into that context. Alternatively, you might think of the literature as a forest. Your thesis is another tree, squirrel, whatever, that you will grow in the forest. The lit review is a guided tour led by you. You tell us what kinds of trees and squirrels are already in the forest, how many of each, whether they're old or young trees, rabid or tame squirrels. All right, well, maybe we've exhausted this analogy. The point is that without the lit review, you cannot demonstrate your mastery of the existing research. If someone else has already worked on this particular model or already evaluated this particular policy, then it's possible you're wasting your time. If someone has found evidence or data that invalidates your solutions, you definitely want to be aware of it up front. You also cannot show your reader what your contribution is to the literature, what your research adds to our knowledge of this topic, unless you tell us what is already thought or known. Finally, The lit review is for your benefit. There may be very compelling theories or models out there that give you some fantastic ideas. There may be data or reports or other research that add to the depth and strength of your argument. One of the most critical phases of the research process is to find them. From a purely tactical perspective, the lit review gives you situational awareness. Once you've identified the other players out there, where they stand, what they've done, what the strengths, gaps, and weaknesses of the literature are, you can make your own contribution with much greater confidence and with much greater impact because your research is now calibrated to fill a known gap or to fix a known weakness. You know your research is necessary and valuable because you've taken the time to find out what else has been written on this topic. If your thesis is in operation, the lit review is the recon phase.